Hi, and welcome to Newsmakers for inside analysis and behind-the-scenes commentary from Santa Barbara's top journalists and local political leaders on the most important news events in our community. I'm your host, Jerry Roberts. Tonight we'll look behind these headlines. A stunning development gives Gregg Hart a free ride from the City Council to the Board of Supes. Two more political surprises in races for sheriff and the council's 3rd district. Santa Barbara education officials find a critical hole in new plans for school safety, and new details emerge about deadly conditions behind the Montecito disaster. Our panel tonight, political reporter Josh Molina, Santa Barbara School Board member Laura Capps, Dale Francisco, conservative leader and recovering former city council member, and investigative reporter Melinda Burns. Thank you all for coming. Well, I must say that the big political story, I think, of the year so far locally is the stunning and sudden withdrawal of Susan Epstein, Goleta School Board member, from the 2nd District Supervisor's race to replace Janet Wolf, with virtually no explanation beyond personal reasons. She was out there, she raised $120,000. She was very aggressive that she was going to run, she was going to go out strong if Janet dropped out. She rounded up a lot of support among Democratic women leaders in particular. She had a lot of other people on her side, and suddenly, in the space of a few hours, a week ago Sunday, she announces she's out, and no, you have no right to know why. Dale,
Jerry,
you've been in the public arena, and you know that you have to sacrifice a certain amount of privacy when you go out and ask people for support, their time, their money, their resources.
right.
Don't you feel that Susan owed her supporters at least more of an explanation than she's given?
I can't answer that for someone else. I have no idea what it was that made her decide to withdraw from the race. Obviously, it was something pretty important to her, and I have to respect her desire for privacy. I understand that she's giving back contributions that were made to her, which I think is the right thing to do. I think the more interesting question about this is what kind of a race, if any, is this going to be?
No race at all.
No race at all at the moment. There's no other person has said anything about running in the 2nd District. And let me preface this by saying, I always have to say this, politics is not personal.
To you, at least.
Well, to me. And unfortunately, it is personal to a lot of people. But I have absolutely nothing personally against Gregg Hart, but I think Gregg Hart is exactly the wrong kind of person for the Board of Supervisors right now. I think Gregg demonstrated in our time together on City Council that he is completely on board with whatever the public employee unions want. And nothing better illustrates that than what happened with the golf course controversy. I don't know if you remember that in 2015. Privatization of the maintenance of the golf course, because the golf course was going downhill. They were eating into their reserves to do operating expenses, and their maintenance cost more than twice as much as any of the local private courses. And it was a knockdown, drag-out fight to say, look, we can't keep this as an independently supported entity unless we privatize the maintenance.
And so he wanted it in the general fund to keep the union jobs.
He wanted to support the golf course out of the general fund, which is absolutely crazy as far as I'm concerned, and it's certainly very much against the interests of the taxpayers in Santa Barbara.
Josh, I know you agree with me that it's an outrage and a disgrace that the voters of the 2nd District now have no choice, and that Gregg Hart has now, within the space of 6 months, not only had a walkover victory in the City Council for a seat he had no intention of ever serving in, and now will have a free ride to the council. What are the leading theories about why Susan Epstein dropped out?
Can you repeat the question?
But first, do you agree with all that?
I think she threw in the towel. I don't think there's a big conspiracy here. I think she does owe it to her supporters at a minimum to say why she has decided not to run, barring if it's something that is deeply personal and there's an explanation for why she would not want to say it, I understand that. But if it's just, I didn't think I could win, I want to get out now, but I don't want to say that, I think she owes the public that explanation. We talked about this before. I think the most logical scenario is that she probably did the math, she did some polling, and saw that it was
Except the people in her campaign were stunned. The people running her campaign.
Yeah, and she also spent very little money, so I think polling would be highly questionable, and we sort of would hear about polling. But I think that, I don't think she made a calculation that she couldn't win. I think, if anything, she was feeling a lot of momentum. And it was a strong campaign, a strong start, a lot of support, a huge turnout for her first event. And things were kind of ticking, on clockwork. It was pretty good. So
I think that's from a supporter, right? So we know Laura supports her and endorsed her.
Well, she did. She doesn't anymore.
Yeah, and I'm one of the people who also is stunned and confused as to her decision. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think if we're being objective about it, that she does owe an explanation. Yeah. And Gregg was the front runner. He's always been the front runner. She could have, of course.
But I had 4 points, Josh. Okay. But here's the thing. I understand that you want to accept the Molly Culver spin on this from the Gregg campaign, but the fact is, according to my reporting, this decision was made between. Well, I talked to a lot of people who had talked to her, between noon and 9 p.m. on a Sunday night without consulting anyone in her campaign.
No, I mean it's a mystery. It's very possible it's not as cut and dry as it looks. There's something else going on, but. That's part of the problem, right? So the big question now is, does she have a political future? After this, can she come back later and say, hey, I want to run for something else? Or has her decision lost too much trust from her supporters?
It depends. I think if information, it's 2 words, but I think if at a time when she feels right, more information is given, and then I think that her future people would understand. I would imagine, and that's, I think, was conveyed to her. Whatever it is, we can work. Whatever it is, we can figure it out, kind of thing. And she's still just really adamant about keeping her privacy, which I do respect on one hand, but it does leave her supporters kind of with disappointment.
There's still a week, Jerry, for somebody to jump into the race, so I wouldn't assume that no one is going to jump in.
Dale, would you like to announce tonight here?
Absolutely not.
Melinda, you've been around as long as Gregg Hart's been around, back when Triceratops ruled the earth and so on. But
very nice.
No, she's younger than I am. Do you agree with Dale that Gregg's going to push the Board of Supervisors way too far to the left?
No, I don't agree with that at all. I think I would hate to see any supervisor try to diminish the strength of the county unions, which are pretty strong public, employee unions. In fact, those unions are the difference between being able to live in Santa Barbara and being a commuter, probably for many people, from 2 hours away. So, I support those unions as well. And for me, the most interaction I've had with Gregg over the years has been as a reporter calling about transportation issues, which he knows inside out, as a public information officer for the Association of Government.
His mastery of the substance of policy is enough recommendation.
Well, and then he was one of he was one of 2 votes on the city council against the gang injunction, which was a very divisive measure over a period of years in the city, caused a great deal of bad feeling and.
Yeah. All right. Next week, Dale Francisco versus Melinda Burns on the future of Santa Barbara's pension problems.
Can I interrupt one thing? Just a fact that I think is important is that Janet Wolf is supporting Susan Epstein. So it defies logic that she felt as though her campaign wasn't going to produce the right results. I mean, it just defies logic.
All right. 2 other surprises.
Jerry, she looked at me directly when she said fact.
Fact.
Oh, that, You'll have your chance later. So 2 other surprises, Josh, in the political realm. One, no less a figure than our very own director, Oscar Gutierrez, wins the Democratic Party nomination in the 3rd District special election and is immediately denounced by your hero, Anne Marie Gott, at the City Council as a puppet of the mayor. Fact or not?
What is the question? What is the fact?
It's just, is he a puppet of Kathy Murillo? Do you agree with your person, Anne Marie Gott?
I don't know if he's a puppet or not. I don't think that
he denies it.
The criticism of that endorsement is not really directed at Oscar. It's directed at Kathy for allegedly lobbying the Democratic Central Committee to endorse Oscar. So that's where the criticism is. It's directed at Kathy. It goes into the narrative that we saw in the the city council election in November, which is that the Democratic Party is secretive about their endorsements, that they handpick who they're going to pick. It's not a fair process, and the mayor is behind the scenes trying to maneuver for this candidate. I don't think we have that same situation as before. This is a micro race. It's very small. We don't have a lot of candidates who are in it, and
Michael Vidal, we should name.
You can't blame Oscar for seeking the Democratic Party endorsement. He filled out the questionnaire. He went up there and met with them. There were 2 other candidates, 3 total, who did that. That's just smart. It's good political campaigning. I mean, if you're a Democrat, you probably want to get the Democrats to endorse you because it's a different, more difficult fight to go against them. And there are other Democrats in the race, but they chose not to fill out the form. The thing.
And how secretive could it be if you found out about it, since no one else reported about that endorsement? It was interesting. How'd you have that wired?
Are you asking me to reveal my sources, Jerry?
You called Gail. How did you know to call Gail? How did you even know they were up there doing that?
The server at Pea Soup Anderson's called me the moment they made the announcement. I knew before Oscar did.
All right. One other thing. Sheriff Bill Brown suddenly has attracted a couple of opponents, which is a surprise. What's going on there?
It is a surprise. Most people felt as though Sheriff Bill Brown would run unopposed, seeking one more 4-year term, re-election, and then Lieutenant Brian Olmstead has gotten the race, and Lieutenant Eddie Sway has also jumped into the race. So now he's facing 2 challengers. It's a surprise. The narrative there is that morale has been declining a little bit within the Sheriff's Department for a lot of reasons. And then we've had the most recent issue with the debris flow, the evacuations. There was the pre-evacuation that a lot of people in Montecito were upset about. They felt it was too early. It was too long. And then we had the debris flow, and they felt, hey, more people should have been in the mandatory evacuation soon. There's a path there. There's an opportunity there. I don't know that that's going to become an issue, but we are going to see a lot of lawsuits, and it's certainly going to be a point of contention in the race.
Melinda, you've looked at the disaster. I think they've taken a deeper dive than almost anybody. Do you think it's a fair hit on Bill Brown that he bungled the evacuation before the debris flow?
It's just so complicated. I think
That was a yes or no question.
It's just very difficult to know exactly what went on behind the scenes and what they knew at the time. Most recently, we've seen a map that did, where the scientists did draw the line at 192, but slightly below it, where 11 people were died.
But who were not under a mandatory
Who were not under a mandatory, and in fact there was confusion about whether they were even under voluntary in different conflicting directives. And so I think that we still have more to find out about how the decision came down.
And is it a fair hit? Is it a fair issue for our campaign?
I think it's going to come up.
Dale, you mentioned before when we were talking that there's always unhappiness with law enforcement officials among the deputies. You think that's what this is about?
Well, that's certainly part of it. Every police organization in the world, every fire department, there's always somewhere between mild and intense dislike of whoever the chief is at any moment. Ask Pat McElroy about that, how things changed overnight when he became chief. So that definitely plays into part of it. And also, chiefs don't last forever. It's unusual for someone to be around even as long as Bill Brown has been. Nothing against Bill. We'll see what happens in that race. But I will also point out that both of those gentlemen who have announced they're running are at about the 30-year mark. So they're at or near a retirement point in terms of their maximum pension.
So this would boost their salary? And
it would boost their salary. And on the other hand, if they don't win, no big deal.
No loss.
Right.
Interesting. All right, we'll look at that. All right, Laura, you made some news at the school board the other night when you stopped the rubber stamping of school safety plan. What was your concern?
My concern is that we have a gun violence epidemic that's ravaging across the country, and it's hard for schools to keep up. I have sympathy. I understand the challenge, but we were, as a board, presented plans for each one of the schools as dictated by California law, and most of them didn't even refer to active shooter scenarios when in fact, unfortunately, tragically, bizarrely, schools are the second most popular choice for people who decide to do this horrendous action. So I said, hey, we got to fix this.
And what was the response?
Agreement. So the existing plans will be updated, and then going forward, we're really going to take a much more in-depth look at how teachers, how school principals need to respond, and the lockdown. They do have lockdown drills that certainly encompass an active shooter scenario, someone entering the campus. But those protocols, as we unfortunately learn with each new shooting, those protocols are changing of how to respond and what are the best things to do. For example, a fire alarm in many scenarios is what you do in a crisis. It's actually one of the worst things to do with an active shooter, because then everyone goes and congregates into a quad, an open area, where it would be much more likely that this person would be able to do much more damage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's horrendous things to think about, but it's, like I said, it's an epidemic, and schools have a lot of pressure on them. Teachers have a lot of pressure on them already. So it wasn't a criticism. It was more just like we need to prioritize this amongst the many things that need to be prioritized.
So are the approval of the plans are on hold now, or what?
No, it's just requests to update the ones that, because California law said they had to be done, we were sort of in this crunch time. So the motion was that the plans that didn't specifically call out protocols for active shooters, and some did, LaCumbre Junior High, for example, the other ones needed to be updated in time for this deadline, but then going forward to really take a much bigger look.
Are there security guards at every school now?
No.
Are there armed? Is anybody?
They're armed at some.
Yeah.
Security guards.
They're called student resource officers.
And meanwhile, the saga of San Marcos High continues.
Yes.
We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the video where the girls were threatened, and now apparently there is graffiti warning of another shooting. What's going on over there?
Well, it's scary, and we're not immune to this, as I said, epidemic. There's been, I read in the New York Times that since Parkland, there's been 50 threats a day in schools. And ordinarily, this advocacy group that tracks this kind of thing, ordinarily it's 10 to 20, and now we're up to 50. So we had, today, Thursday, there was graffiti found, actually yesterday, Wednesday. School is still open at San Marcos. It was said that there was going to be this shooting on Friday, March 9th. The person who did it has not been identified. Sheriff presence has greatly heightened on campus. Mental health counselors are now there, but school is remaining open. The good news is protocols that have been put in since this online video episode at San Marcos, involving other schools as well. Since then, a new protocol is this technology way in which if someone sees something, they could text "stop it" by any device anonymously and report it. And that's how this graffiti was discovered, which is really important in an environment with peer pressure and kids don't want to, you know, feel like they're snitching and going in and seeing the principal. And so this is the way that this graffiti was found, which is the evidence of a new protocol that was just put into place.
You're a parent of a public school student. Is this on the kids' minds?
I don't have a child in high school, so I can't answer that. Certainly, all the kids are aware of the national shootings that occur. I mean, they see that on TV or hear about it. The day of the one in Florida, that everyone's talking about it. I don't know. I can't answer that. I don't know if people are real finely tuned into what's happening at San Marcos at the elementary school level or the junior high level. My sense is they have siblings, and they're probably aware of it.
But a lot of this, to me, I mean, that's a really good point that you brought up about all of a sudden there are 50 of these threats a week instead of 10.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, a lot of this is a response to media overkill and really overblowing this. I mean, if you look at, I know this probably sounds crazy, but the number of school shootings has declined considerably since the 1990s. And I read that in USA Today, by the way, so I know that it's true.
That's true.
But the media coverage of these events has really skyrocketed.
So all right. I love Dale. Dale's awesome, but
something bad is on its way.
We cannot blame the media coverage for escalating the problem here, because there may have been more shootings in the past, but we have not had mass shootings at schools like we're having here. And the media has to cover it. If the media doesn't cover it, the media gets blamed for ignoring these issues. So yeah, you're talking about cable. If people are watching, they're going to cover it. I just don't. I mean, it's not the media's fault for covering it.
I'm not suggesting prior restraint,
right,
but I am saying that a contributor to this, to paranoia and to fear, to the extent that it exists among students, certainly is stimulated by the intense coverage of these events.
That'll be all for tonight, because we're going to shut down this discussion.
No, I mean, you could go there and you could say parenting, you could say video games, you could say, look at what's happening in children's home lives. You could sort of cast a lot of blame for that, but I just don't think it's the media's fault for covering this. We want to know what's happening. We need as much information as possible. We have to look at the issue of gun violence. It's not the media at all, in my opinion.
All right.
Although Dale's way smarter than me, I acknowledge that, but on that issue, I have to weigh in.
That was a low blow.
Okay, why don't you two take it outside? Melinda, so you're continuing to look into the disaster in Montecito, and you've been reading these reports, God bless you, on watershed and other things. What's the latest that you have?
Well, they're saying that there are these dozens of drainages, not just creeks, but drainages above Montecito and Carpinteria, and probably half of them have a 60% chance of creating a debris flow if you get, a decent amount of rain, and in a short time period, as we've seen. And so that's pretty high. And we know that the mountains are loaded. We know that Montecito, if you take the whole Thomas Fire, the huge Thomas Fire, all the way into Ojai and Ventura County, it's Montecito that has the steepest slopes, the deepest canyons, the worst, most severely burned area. And this is a recipe, as we've heard, for a repeat of what we had.
So it sort of
January
raises
9th.
the existential question of why were their homes built there? Why did people build their homes there? Why did
it's a very
planning allow them to build their homes?
The whole community of Montecito
and
part of Santa Barbara is built on these debris flows. The term in geology is alluvial fans. They just sort of spread out from the mouths of the canyon as soon as they hit the lower lying areas.
Yeah, well, you could stand on the wharf, and it's quite dramatic to see how many there are.
And so, you know, every storm now, it's like we have a fear of rain, and yet we want rain. We're in a severe drought, so that's a huge natural disaster that we confront now. Huge drought, severe and ongoing, because we're in March, and we're not going to get much more rain. So there's rain predicted on Saturday, and it is not going to trigger, it's minimal flow per hour. Maybe 1 to 2 inches total, but if it's spread out, it doesn't create a debris flow, and it's not going to be spread out. I mean, it's not going to be intense.
Who is the decision maker in this whole situation about what people are allowed to do, people whose homes have been destroyed, are allowed to do with their property going forward?
Well, we're going to see the county weighing in on this, and they're studying it right now. The creeks rearranged themselves in Montecito. You can just drive up to Hot Springs Road and Olive Mill and see how that happened. And so some places in Montecito will likely not be able to rebuild. We don't know what they are yet. That's going to take months to come up with that information.
So people are just kind of out of luck.
But in the meantime, we're looking at 3 to 5 years, maybe more, depending on if the drought continues, of this state of alert starting in December.
3 to 5 years.
Until the vegetation grows back above Montecito, and there are some roots of chaparral to hang onto the dirt and the rocks so that it doesn't all come tumbling down those steep slopes.
Does the Army Corps of Engineers have authority in this, in terms of rebuilding or what happens, or are they just kind of helping with the cleanup?
Good question. I'm not sure about that, because they do look at streams and channels, and I'm sure that their science will
And flood maps.
be taken into account. If you look at the flood map versus the debris flow footprint, I can't even, I don't know if there's an acreage or square miles on this, but it looks to me like it's at least 50% bigger, the debris flow, than the flood maps. And so you might have known that your house was in a flood zone, but now you might not be in a flood zone, but you're in the debris flow footprint. And the next debris flow, if there is one, may not even take that same footprint. In fact, they're talking about Carpinteria as being a worse risk now.
Well, it's a huge story. It's going to be a huge story for years. And we all, I think, really appreciate your coverage of it, and the way that you make it available to all of the news organizations in town is just exemplary. And your check's in the mail. Don't worry about it. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for watching, and thanks to tonight's panel, Josh Molina, Dale Francisco, Laura Capps, and Melinda Burns. Please visit our website, newsmakerswithjr.com, to check out my regular blog posts on politics and media in Santa Barbara and beyond, and our YouTube channel, where you'll find a fascinating archive of our past shows and special interviews. Thanks to our director, District 3 frontrunner Oscar Gutierrez, to our crew, Andrew, Diane, and Susie, and as always, our top-ranking, high-powered, high-energy senior executive producer, Hap Freund. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.